All right, let's get that back on presenter view.
Yeah, okay.
There we go. All right, now just use the right arrow key and we'll go to the next slide. There we go, good. Okay, so I'm gonna do the same on my version, if I can. Okay, the atrocious conclusion. So here's the conclusion that is atrocious. We should burn all the fossil fuels that can easily be reached as quickly as we can, and then, once we've made good progress on that, we should start an all-out nuclear war. This is the atrocious conclusion that a commitment to totalism-based long-termism implies if certain plausible empirical claims are correct. To avoid this conclusion, we need to do more than argue about empirically debatable premises. We need to reject totalism. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit on this slide and then we'll sort of start clicking through the slides more quickly after that. So let's start with the definition of totalism. Totalism is the thought that the world is better if it contains more total utility. It's a version of utilitarianism. And moreover, it's not just a point about value or axiology. It's a point that has deontological significance. It tells us what we ought to do. So I'm going to focus my argument on, in favor of rejecting totalism, on Will MacAskill's recent book, What We Owe the Future, came out this year. The argument that follows is related to the old criticism of act utilitarianism when it comes to punishment. I assume everyone's familiar with the basic idea that in certain circumstances, a utilitarian might think that it's best and appropriate, the right thing to do to punish an innocent person. And that would be if, for example, they can't find or get a conviction on the guilty person. And if you don't punish someone, there will be a mob response. You need the deterrence, etc. There are various utilitarian reasons why the punishment must be done. And so you say, well, screw innocence. Let's just make sure we achieve the good we need to achieve. Now, utilitarian theorists have sometimes tried to argue that if we pay attention to the details, then we would see that their theory actually isn't so bad, right? Because it would justify punishing the innocent only in the most extreme circumstances when any reasonable person would agree that that's what should be done. The problem is their defense of a utilitarian theory of punishment looks too contingent. The details have to work out the right way, and it's not clear that they do. And our intuitive thought is just the inappropriateness of punishing the innocent is not so contingent. So my point here is a similar structure. Whether MacAskill's totalism-based long-termism supports the atrocious conclusion does depend on debatable empirical claims, but it would be a mistake for someone who supports the kind of totalism he supports to focus on the empirical details. Right? The rejection of the conclusion that we ought to have this nuclear war should be more principled than that. Now, you could ask the question, why do we need to do this to reject totalism? It's long been known that utilitarianism could lead to morally unpalatable conclusions, even worse than punishing the innocent in extreme cases. Here's an example. Suppose we could quickly and painlessly kill all the people in a certain country and replace them with people who would be slightly happier. Well, then the act utilitarians committed to thinking that that's what's to be done. But there are a couple problems with that kind of move. First, it's a thin stipulation. We're just to suppose this. It's a fantasy. Excuse me. I have a dog. We have a delivery truck. So the dog's going to bark. Sorry, not much I can do about that. Sunny. Okay. She likes to hang out with me in the office and bark. So thin stipulation, fantasy, the utilitarian can respond to that by saying, look, you don't really know what you're talking about. You're just making stuff up to try to criticize us, the utilitarian. And so the point of the atrocious conclusion argument is this is not a thin stipulation. It's not a fantasy. Now, it's far from clear that the empirical details I'm going to discuss are right, but it's also far from clear that they're wrong. They're plausible. And thus it provides, I think, a realistic and compelling basis for rejecting totalism, more compelling than you get with the standard arguments that are either fantasy or that the utilitarian can just say, well, if you work it out right, we're actually correct. Okay, so next slide, please. This is the structure. There we go, the two-part argument. So part one, they defend the claim that totalism-based long-termism combined with plausible empirical assumptions leads to the atrocious conclusion. And in part two, I raise 4 potential objections to the argument and then reply to them. So let's jump into part one. Here's the summary of the 7 steps in the argument. I'm actually not going to rehearse them all now because I'm going to go through them one by one as it comes. So let's just go right ahead to the next slide and start doing it. Step 1, modern technology poses a serious threat to extinguish all human life on Earth. Now, why would I say that? Well, nuclear bombs may become even more destructive than they are. Bioweapons may become more destructive and they're hard to police. Nanotechnology, which might lead to, for example, the creation of nanobots that would, say, eat up all the corn or the grain in an area. These could be weaponized in that kind of way. Artificial intelligence might allow those who want to cause harm to cause more harm through nanotechnology, maybe bioweapons. They can do it more precisely and effectively than ever before. And these threats could combine. So, for example, we could have a nuclear war followed by a bioweapon release. And that might be the end of the game for us. Next slide, please. Global nuclear war, just by itself, if the bombs don't become worse than they already are, is very unlikely to end all human life. But it might, if easily accessible fossil fuels are mostly used up, cause society to lose, quote, the ability to create most industrial and post-industrial technology. That's a quote from MacAskill. In other words, we would hit a low-tech cap. So 4 points to expand on that. The worst case scenario for global nuclear war, this is MacAskill, but I'm going to agree with him for the sake of argument, because I think he's probably right, is that it would kill most of humanity, let's say even 99% of humanity, but not everyone. It's not going to hit all corners of the earth. The worst consequences, like a global nuclear winter, wouldn't completely wipe out the ability to grow some sort of crops, and that would pass. So the thought is that at least 1% of humanity would survive. And humanity could rebuild if it did survive, and it could rebuild basically completely if the fossil fuels are in the ground still to be used. Now, why do we need that? We'll get to that in bullet point 4. Let's just say bullet point 3, in another 100 years, if we continue to use fossil fuels as they are being used, they might be mostly gone. And okay, now why does it matter? Well, rebuilding would require making use of sophisticated metallurgy, right? High tech runs on steel and various alloys, and they take high temperatures. To get those high temperatures, I assume this is not an absolute point, but if you don't have other high-tech ways of creating the high-tech temperatures, you need metallurgical coal. If we use up the metallurgical coal, it may be impossible to rebuild. Next slide, please. So it's hard to see how else we might hit a low-tech cap. If living in a high-tech world brings with it the risk of human-caused extinction, then you might think, okay, let's see if we can get rid of our high-tech capacity. And of course, it would be best if we could do that without having an all-out nuclear war, but it's hard to see how else we might not only temporarily limit the existential risks from a high technology, but impose a permanent low-tech cap. In particular, it's hard to see how any political action could lead to humans giving up our high-tech abilities. Why? Think about what's happened what's happened with our ability to address global climate change, right? It looks like we can't even make the smallest of sacrifices in order to stave off what looks like it's going to be a much worse situation in the near future. So I think our evidence from our inability to address serious problems indicates that addressing the risk from high-tech technology is probably beyond us. So we probably have to, if we want to get rid of high-tech technology, attack. Okay. All right, so let's see. It looks like, we'll just keep going. So next slide, please. I skipped something I had in my notes to say, but it's all right. We'll come back to it if we need to. So if humanity hits a low-tech cap, it would no longer pose the threat of permanent extinction to itself, right? So to be clear, hitting a low-tech cap does not mean that humans would cease to do ingenious things with technology. You know, they may do all sorts of stuff using the kinds of technologies that were available to people before the Industrial Revolution and to continue to develop those. But some of the high-tech things that we can do now that are relevant to posing an existential threat, from nanotechnology to supercomputers and AI, that would be permanently beyond them. And without nuclear weapons, AI, and other high-tech abilities, I will assume that humans will be unable to cause human extinction. Next slide, please. What about the quality of life? That's relevant for utilitarian. So I say the quality of life with a low-tech cap would be well worth living for most people, and we, or intelligent creatures who might evolve from us, would probably go on living far into the future, creating a huge positive future for humanity. So to get into the details a bit on that, I say that within a few generations, I assume life would return to a pre-industrial normal. And such lives were valuable for those who lived them, at least mostly, right? Obviously, some people have bad lives, some people have good lives. On average, I assume that pre-industrial life was well worth living. Our intelligence is also more adaptive than fur or feathers or fangs or any other things that so many other species depend on. Accordingly, I suggest we would go on until, as MacAskill puts it, some natural disaster like an asteroid strike killed us off. Now, there's a reasonable chance that humanity could go on until the sun gets too hot. That would be, according to the astrophysicists out there, something like 1 billion years from now. Now, there's always a risk that something else would happen. We'll come back to that. But I presume that there's at least a chance we could go for 1 billion years. Now, we would presumably undergo evolution, so it wouldn't exactly be us, right? But given how adaptive our intelligence is, I suspect that if there's something of us that would last, it would be that, right? As long as it couldn't be used to create our own extinction. Okay, thus, sorry, someone was crinkling something loudly, but I think we're good now. Thus, our descendants, intelligent humanoids, if not Homo sapiens per se, could last approximately 1 billion years. All right, next step. Now we get into the real core of the argument. So we can expect more total utility in a world with a low-tech cap. So we need to get the next slide, please. See, you're not seeing it. Can we get the next slide? There we go. More total utility in a world with a low-tech cap than in one in which high-tech presents a constant low risk of an extinction event. So this is the balancing question, right? For the totalist, which way lies the best total expected utility? Here's the pro-nuclear war case. So let's assume that 100 million, which is 1% of current population, roughly, right? That 100 million or 10 to the 8th humans survive the war. And that the population then grows to reach the Earth's pre-industrial carrying capacity, which I'll peg at about 1 billion, assuming we're not going to have the same kind of modern agriculture that we have now. So that's 10 to the 9. Assuming MacAskill is right, that the odds of being hit by an extinction-level asteroid are less than 1 in 15 billion, that is the number he provides, then there's a 90% chance, if you do the math, that we'll not be hit by one in the next billion years. So what does that give us? We've got 10 to the 9th humans over 10 to the 9th years. That's 10 to the 18 human years that I will suppose will be on average tolerably happy. So I'll use each of these years as a baseline for the comparative utility calculation. I'll call them normal human years. Next slide, please. So here's the argument for avoiding nuclear war. So assume that for each year of the next 300 or so, there's a 0.1% chance of an extinction event driven by new technology. Now, I don't think we can assume anything like that as a flat probability. But there are people who work in these sorts of long-termist communities who talk about the risks going up in various ways, and then they hope that we'll figure out how to control the technologies in the right way, and then the odds will go way back down. So let's say for the sort of crucial year for dealing with our high-tech, crucial period, for dealing with our high-tech capacity is about 300 years, and we'll call the average chance of extinction 0.1%. That gives us, if you do the math, about a 74% chance of surviving that 300-year period. That's not great, but it's not terrible. So let's assume that we're going to make it through that. Then we assume that we figured out how to tame the threats, and the odds of extinction caused by humans using their own high tech drops by a factor of 1,000. That's just an assumption, but let's play with the numbers and see what we get. So if it drops by 1,000, it drops to 0.0001%. And let's assume that the Earth has a carrying capacity of about 10 billion people, and that life in the high-tech future will be pretty good. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt here, 10 times better than under the low-tech cap. That's a lot of betterness. I don't think that's a realistic assumption, but I'm giving it to them, right? So if the population is 10 times bigger and the lives are 10 times better on average, then humanity doesn't have to last a billion years. For the total utility to be the same, it would have to be 10 million years. So what are the odds of doing that? Okay, so we've got, here's the odds of survival, 0.0001%, or rather it's the odds of extinction per year, right? And so put that in and carry it out for 10 million years. That's the exponent there. And the exponential, what do we get? 0.0045%. Those are pretty bad odds. Next slide, please. Okay. So to finish the comparison, we need to give some odds that humanity would go extinct before the sun gets too hot if it endures an all-out nuclear war and then hits a low-tech cap. So I assume that there's some chance that if we have the all-out nuclear war, small chance that we just go extinct. That's going to turn out to be in the noise when you think about the carrying capacity of the Earth, so I'll put that aside. And my basic assumption is really this, that high-tech poses a greater extinction risk than life under a low-tech cap. So I'm going to assume that the extinction risk is there, but it's 1,000 times smaller because we're only at risk from basically things in nature. And I think we're deadlier than things in nature. So I'm giving us the 1,000 times smaller. So what are the odds that we make it a billion years? Well, I put that down there in that third small bullet. I'm not going to count the nines, but I've basically added 3 extra nines to take into account the 1,000 times lower probability of an extinction event, and carrying it out from an exponential of a billion. What do we get? 36.8%. In sum, it's much more likely that humanity would survive for a billion years after hitting the low-tech cap than that it would survive for 10 million years in the high-tech future. Again, just using these numbers that I'm making up, but I'm making up to be more or less plausible, I think. All right, next slide. Now we're coming to the end of part 1. So the reductio is now established. Unless I've made some basic mistake, and I'll address the objections shortly, the implication of accepting totalism in a set of plausible empirical assumptions is that we should have an all-out nuclear war to make it more likely that humanity will experience a maximum total utility. But this is an atrocious conclusion to reach. We should reject it. We should do our best to make the world safe for humanity going forward, but without killing most of humanity to do so. We should follow that path, even if it means that there will be less human-based utility in the universe. All right, next slide, please. Here's MacAskill's, I think, best response before we get to the objections and replies. He thinks he can ward off this sort of utilitarian threat with an appeal to deontology. Here's a quote from him. "We should try to make the world better, but we should respect moral side constraints, such as against harming others." So, even on those rare occasions when some rights violation would bring about better long-term consequences, doing so would not be morally acceptable. So he thinks he's got a kind of side constraint that protects against this kind of argument. I say this appeal will not help him. Almost all deontologists, even the most stringent of them, accept the idea of threshold deontology. That's the idea that when things get bad enough, what would otherwise be an impermissible rights violation becomes, all things considered, permissible. So if we assume that the odds of achieving 10 to the 18 normal human years are much higher, 36.8% versus 0.0045%, in the world of a low-tech cap than in the world of ongoing high-tech, then it seems that we have an imbalance great enough to overcome the constraint of the rights of those who would die in the nuclear holocaust. Now, one might object that killing people in a nuclear war is not so easy to justify as a matter of threshold deontology, because the people killed will be used as a means of creating the low-tech cap, right? So I think, just as a general moral principle, and I argue this in other places, that, for example, think about the trolley problem. I assume most, if not all of you, are familiar with the idea that it's permissible to turn a trolley from 5 onto 1, so that's killing one to save 5. But it's not permissible to push one in the path of the trolley to save 5, because the one who is pushed is used as a means. But, many people would say, and I too would say this, even though I'm a die-hard deontologist, there might come a point, I don't know when it is, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, 1 million people, where you say, sorry, we got to push the one guy on the track to save that many people. But still, the threshold is very different, right? Okay, so the argument could be made, nuclear war is like pushing the big guy in front of the trolley. But I think that's actually not right. The justifying goal of imposing a low-tech cap is really about knocking out the high-tech that threatens human existence. From the point of view of the totalist-based long-termist, trying to maximize normal human years, i.e. utility, no human needs to be targeted. Those who target them to launch the war might be acting, they might be acting wrongly. But the fact that someone's going to act wrongly doing what ought to be done is not a reason to prevent them. Consider this case. Imagine you're a military commander, and you've got some pilots. There's a mission that should be run. It's all things considered justifiable. And the one guy you've got, everyone else is, they're not available for whatever reason. Here's the one guy who's left. He's good for the job. You know he can do it. You know he follows orders. But you know that in his mind, he's going to be dropping the bombs to kill non-combatants, right? He's that kind of guy. So in some sense, he's behaving wrongly. Does that mean you shouldn't allow him to go? I think it doesn't. I think it means you criticize him for doing what he shouldn't do, but that's what he shouldn't do in terms of his mental state. you encourage him, you send him, in fact, to go do what should be done just in terms of the physical acts. I think the same is true in this case, and so I think threshold deontology is not going to allow Will MacAskill to avoid the atrocious conclusion. Okay, that's the end of part one. And according to my clock, we've gone about 26 minutes, so let's go on if that's all right with you, Bashar.
Yeah, that's fine.
Good. So let's do the objections and replies. Next slide. Here are the 4 objections. This time I think I should review them all in case we don't get to all of them. First, I overlooked 2 empirical possibilities that together change the odds dramatically and show that the atrocious conclusion is really not something that might plausibly be implied by totalism: sentient AI and interstellar travel. That's actually, I think, this sounds rather science fiction-y, but I think that's actually the deepest objection prior to me. my most creative move. I'm proud of this move to try to respond to that objection. Then we've got the rejection of totalism implies neutrality about creating new people, but that position is morally implausible. That's also a deep objection and an important one to cover. And the other 2, less deep, but worth covering if we have the time. I'm too sanguine about humanity coming to a premature end, and I'm too committed to nuclear war being in principle justifiable. And I'll explain why that is if and when we get to objection number 4. All right, let's start with objection number 1, slide 16, please. Okay, so here's the AI and interstellar travel idea. So sentient AI, just by itself, this thought, sentient AI could change the calculation in favor of high tech. Here's the idea. If it could create computers that had the ability to think and feel as animals do, well, they would have moral standing. And we could create tons of them. Tons is the wrong measure. Billions of them, right? So if we created billions of them, then there's that many more creatures in the universe, in this case, created by us, that would have moral standing and whose benefits would be important, morally significant. So the number of relevant creatures goes way up. So if we were to have the nuclear war and deprive ourselves of this high-tech future, we wouldn't get them. So there's actually more lives at stake in hanging on to the high-tech future. That's the idea. Okay. So there's a lot to say about that idea, and I don't want to spend too long on it, but I will say this. It seems to me that it presupposes not only the technological possibility, but the moral desirability of having sentient AI. And I'm not sure in any way that having sentient AI is a good thing to add to the mix. It seems to me this is the exact kind of fantasy notion that I'm trying to avoid in doing the atrocious conclusion. So I'm just going to stipulate that there's no clear moral desirability here. We're going to put this aside. But let's look at how interstellar travel might interact with the idea that we'll have not sentient AI, but the kind of AI that would really help with interstellar travel. See, I've got a typo in the word create. So interstellar travel looks implausible now. The nearest star is 4 light years away. To get there at even 1% of the speed of light would take 400 years. And then, of course, you get the problem. You're going 1% the speed of light. How do you stop and land on a planet that might be around the nearest star, even if there was one that was in the habitable zone? So there's real huge technological problems with interstellar travel. But it's not fantasy to imagine we could solve those problems, particularly if we had the kind of AI that would allow space probes to carry information. And instead of having to carry live beings, it would just carry the ability to recreate life when it takes root in another planet. Right? It might even carry the knowledge that it could, imagine if you could clone humans from, let's say, a bunch of frozen embryos that you sent across space. Well, it's a lot easier to send a frozen embryo than to send or even just a blastocyst, right? Than to send an adult human. So we send all these frozen things, and then we grow new humans on the new planet. And once they are grown, the machine educates them, and there we go. We've got new life on a new planet. Pretty fantastical, but there's nothing that's sort of morally beyond our ability to visualize. So it's not that kind of fantasy. So next slide, please. Let's assess it. Assume the odds. I'm going to give them, again, I'm making up numbers, but I'm trying to be generous to the other side here. Assume the odds of eventually being able to design robust probes that could travel scores, if not thousands of light years and land on distant Earth-like planets carrying a payload of information and technology necessary to rebuild intelligent life on these other worlds is 1%. Right? Is that too high? Who knows? Let's give them 1%. Assume that if they successfully find planets on which to land, the odds of these probes successfully recreating intelligent life is, again, 1%. And assume that if they successfully recreate life, the odds of this process repeating, and that they can go out again, is 1%. Now, clearly the model here is something like a viral infection, right? So the virus goes, it finds a new host. Is it able to recreate itself in the new host and relaunch and go on and on? If it does, well, then we could colonize the galaxy in this method, right? But what are the odds? If we have 1% for each of these, then the total probability is 0.0001%. But the payoff could be huge. Next slide, please. Let's look at the payoff. So if it turns out this kind of thing is doable, we can have kind of exponential growth in intelligent life across the galaxy, could last until the stars die out about 1 trillion years from now. Okay, so let's assume that this increases the time scale of intelligent life in the galaxy by, from 1 billion to 1 trillion, that's a factor of 1,000. Assume the number of planets occupied with the average population, like the Earth, would be 1 million across the galaxy. Yeah, is that too high? I don't know. There's something like, that would be like 1 out of 10,000 stars. It seems ballpark plausible, right? The quality of life, we can assume if we've got this sort of high-tech cloning going on, it's going to be good. So we're going to make it like the high-tech future here on Earth. So we've got Earth-like population with a high-tech future, 1 million of those planets lasting an extra 1,000 times longer than if life was just kept on Earth. So the total payoff goes up by a factor of 100 billion. That's huge. We discount the odds by the expected utility. Sorry, the expected utility gain is 10,000 times higher. Boom, I lose. We need to go with the high-tech future because we've got a expected utility factor 10,000 times higher. Again, I'm not saying the numbers I've used are correct, that the possibility of spreading to other stars establishes the totalists should avoid the atrocious conclusion. My point is this. I have to admit that the numbers I've given here are as plausible as the ones I used to show the totalists should be stuck with the atrocious conclusion. And it looks like they can then say, no, see, we're not, we're fine, everything's good. So what do I have to say against that? Next slide, please. I think this is a problem like the St. Petersburg paradox. So I assume many of you know the St. Petersburg paradox, but I'll review it very quickly. Paradox can be stated by asking how much you would pay to play the game. I don't know if people can see me while I'm talking. I think probably you're just seeing the screen, but maybe you can see me. I'm doing the coin flip, right? So do the coin flip motion. If it comes up heads on the first flip, you get $2. If it comes up heads on the second flip, you get $4. On the third flip, you get $8. So the formula is you get as many dollars as 2 to the n, where n is the number of flips it took to come up heads. The expected value of playing this game is infinite. We just do the expected value of the payoff times the probability, and it's 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 to infinity. So it seems that you should be willing to pay everything you've got to play this game. But that's crazy, right? Let's say you were able to scrape together $1 million. That was everything you could possibly beg, borrow, and steal, right? And you put it on the line, and I flip the coin, and oh, you're doing really well. 10 flips before it comes up heads. Guess what? You got $1,000 roughly back, and you put $1 million down to play the game. This is crazy, right? Don't play this game. Or at least don't pay more than, I don't know, $10, $12. I mean, you shouldn't be that you're guided by the expected utility, right? Now, it's not really a paradox, but the game seems to show there's something wrong with the idea of letting straightforward expected utility theory guide single choices with low odds and high potential payoffs. Next slide, please. In the context of deciding whether to accept the atrocious conclusion, humanity is essentially in the position of a single play player. There we go. At least according to the basic argument sketched out above, the plausible empirical assumptions imply that the safe move for a totalist is to use up all the readily available fossil fuels and trigger an all-out nuclear war. The risky move, with a much worse payoff, is to hang on to our high-tech society and try to avoid causing our own extinction. What makes this risky move seem better with this objection is the huge payoff if we can make space colonization work. All right, but it's a huge payoff with tiny, tiny odds of coming to pass, right? And basically, we would have to all pay to play by exposing ourselves to a much higher risk of premature extinction. I say that's as irrational to pay that cost as to put your life on the line, assuming you're, here's a comparison. Assume you're young and healthy. Assume that if you, how do I put this? Suppose you were thinking like Gilgamesh. Remember Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh? He has this incredibly difficult odyssey to try to achieve, and if he achieves it, he'll get immortality. But it looks like he can't do it. So something similar. You could get 1,000 years of healthy life, but only with a tiny chance of getting it, right? And you'd have to put your life on the line, and the default is you'd have a normal, healthy life. If you have a 1 in 10,000 chance of getting the 1,000 years of extra life, do you want to put your life on the line? It seems like a bad bet. I think the same thing is true for humanity. So I think, though the expected utility calculus works out in favor of not, this plausibly works out in favor of not coming to the atrocious conclusion, it does so only by embracing the wrong end of the St. Petersburg paradox. So, so I think the atrocious conclusion still stands from objection number 1. Let me do objection number 2 and number, I'll do 2 with some detail and the other 2 a little quicker. So next slide, please. Slide 21. Implausible neutrality about creating people. So my argument against totalism presupposes the principle of neutrality about the moral significance of future lives. That is, I'm committed to the principle that, except insofar as having future people is important for the projects of existing people, there's no deontologically significant moral value in the creation of more happy lives. Now, MacAskill offers 2 reasons to reject neutrality about creating new people. 1, he's got a raw intuition that it's better to create more happy people. I'm just going to say, I'm not moved. But the more interesting one is he thinks there's a supposed failure of philosophy to explain an asymmetry that has to be true if neutrality is true. So next slide. Here's what MacAskill says. If we think it's bad to bring into existence a life of suffering, why should we not think that it's good to bring into existence a flourishing life? I think any argument for the first claim would also be a good argument for the second. Here's Johann Frick's explanation, which I basically accept for why MacAskill's argument here is not right. So Johann says, even though creating a person with a happy life can be considered to benefit this person, we have no moral obligation to create a person just because they will be happy. Our moral reasons to confer well-being on a person S are not unconditional reasons to promote well-being, as a utilitarian would have it, but rather conditional reasons which have their source in that person S, a being with moral status. So here's my gloss on what this gives us for the atrocious conclusion. We have reason not to create a miserable person, because if we do create that person, there'll be a person who's miserable. And that's a bad thing. We don't likewise have a reason not to fail to create a happy person, because if we fail to create the happy person, there's no person who's not created and thereby misses out on being happy. So I think this gives us a conditional account of why we should create, conditional on the person, people already having a life. And that explains why we can be neutral about the creation of new people. That defends my anti-totalism. Next slide. I'm going to breeze through this one. This is the being too sanguine about premature extinction. Thought is, suppose there's a future generation that looks back at us and says, hey, we didn't need to be the last generation, but you screwed up by not embracing the atrocious conclusion, and now we are. Don't they have a right to blame us? And as I said, I'm going to breeze through that and say no. Let's take the last one. The objection is, so next slide. Yeah, okay, good. No, wait. Yes, good. The one that starts with the line, next slide. Sorry, next slide. There it is. I admit. Okay. So I admit, if it were somehow necessary to fight a nuclear war now to prevent the takeover of a regime, some sort of global regime that would enslave and torture billions of people every year for thousands of years, then we should fight that war now. So the question is, how is this not just as bad as the atrocious conclusion? So I want to say two things. One, I admit that we can justify killing present people, generally only as collateral damage, if doing so is necessary and proportional to preventing billions of people who will come into existence, who would come to exist from suffering horrible lives. I've not said that we could justify killing billions of people now in order to maximize total utility. So this is just a different point. This is a point connected to the point about the asymmetry between creating strong reasons to avoid creating miserable people and the lack of reason to create happy people. Right? So I think there's just a fundamental moral difference there. Two, the empirical case for thinking that we might have to kill billions now or soon to prevent many more from suffering horrible lives for many years thereafter is fundamentally fanciful. Right? This is the kind of thing that I've been saying, we want to do better than engage in fundamentally fanciful arguments to test principles. We want to have something that's at least plausible. The atrocious conclusion is plausible. The idea that we might have to fight a nuclear war to prevent this kind of entrenched regime from torturing people for billions of years, that's just fantasy. So next slide, conclusion. So why should we care? First, it's an important philosophical point, providing a big extra nail in the coffin of totalist utilitarian thinking. Second, it has practical significance beyond that. First, with regard to population ethics, it should reinforce the common sense conclusion challenged by totalist utilitarians that we should not push for a maximally large human population on Earth. In other words, if you're a totalist, you will not only accept the atrocious conclusion, but also the repugnant conclusion. That's the conclusion that even if life on average gets worse and worse and worse, as long as it's still worth living, we should keep packing people into the earth. Well, that's driven by a number of things, but one of them is totalist utilitarian thinking. We should chop that out. And this helps take one leg out from the repugnant conclusion. Two, the argument helps to contain a dubious change that's lurking in the effective altruist movement. The move from focusing on what we can do to save lives and create a more just world now to invest in changes that have a tiny probability of making a positive difference in the vast long-term future. Right? Now, you can be a long-termist without being a totalist. You can be a long-termist just because you think that if you don't do something now, some bad state will be entrenched in the future. But I think a lot of the oomph for the long-termist focus that takes attention away from the here and now is really driven by totalism. And so if we get rid of that, we can focus more on the more imminent future. So last slide. So I can hear the objection one last time. Haven't I argued that we're courting disaster to continue with the inevitable development of technology? Yep, I have. But the odds of disaster at any one time are quite small. And it's up to each generation to address the threats of their time and to do what they can to pass on a fair chance to live well to the next generation. If they fail, that'll be a disaster. But we cannot justify having an all-out nuclear war in 100 years to ensure that they can't screw it up. What if they do screw it up and human existence is cut short? That'll be terrible for them. But it won't be so bad that any prior generation should sacrifice most of itself for their sake. And why should they? To maximize utility? Who cares? There's no prize for running up the score. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Alec. Thank you. Thank you for this
You're welcome.
lecture. And raises, I guess, I hope, questions. I'll open the floor for our audience. I see a hand, Chris. I'm not sure I can see all the hands, but yes, I have two hands, Chris and then Salim, I guess, right? You go. Yeah. Chris, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I do.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. It's. I mean, if I had gotten here on time, and also I had more time to study MacAskill's thesis, I might have more to say. But just something that may be obvious that I might have missed. I couldn't help thinking that that an all-out nuclear war would result in pretty much the destruction of the death of everyone and an uninhabitable Earth for perpetuity. So I didn't understand how this could possibly be a conclusion of
Right.
argument.
So let me just say that this is a straightforward one. It turns out most people who look at this actually think that's not true. There was a lot of fear mongering. I remember the movie. What was it called? I don't remember the name of the movie. I remember that Henry Kissinger was on TV to sort of introduce this movie about the nuclear holocaust and how it's going to destroy life on Earth completely. But actually, if you look at the experts, and MacAskill cites a number of experts who discuss this, that's not the current view. The current view is an all-out nuclear war would probably kill pretty much everyone in the northern hemisphere, but not the southern hemisphere, because there are fewer places that would be targeted down there, right? So the folks in places like New Zealand, Australia, maybe Indonesia, parts of Africa, parts of South America, they don't make it. Now, not to say that things wouldn't be rough. Nuclear winter would set in, and the food crops and the animals would migrate. All sorts of things would go really badly.
Yeah,
but not so badly as to wipe out all of humanity. So I do deal with the possibility in the argument that that's wrong, and that there's a chance that it would wipe out all of humanity. But the current view is that it would be very unlikely to do that.
All right, yeah, so I don't have the relevant information, but it seems unlikely that things would be. I mean, the way in which weather patterns, ocean patterns work, that somehow everything would be affected. But maybe not, But it just seems like a risky thing.
Of course, it's risky. Of course, it's risky. But the question is, if you're looking at risks one way or the other, make your assumptions and then, try to get more evidence, obviously. And hey, look, first, this is just a thought experiment, and it's set not for action, except in terms of using up the fossil fuels. That should go on now, according to this argument, right? Because you may have missed this part too.
Yeah.
If we retain our fossil fuels, then destroying all the high tech we've got now wouldn't prevent us from just rebuilding it. But the thought is that if we don't have access, in particular to metallurgical coal, then it becomes really hard to rebuild high-tech society. So even if we would survive, we could impose what I've been calling the low-tech cap. So the question is, suppose this would be 50% likely to impose a low-tech cap, 1% likely to cause total extinction, but otherwise 99% likely to not cause total extinction but give us the low-tech cap, then work out the implications. It looks like if you're a totalist, it might be the thing to do. And that's wacko.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Seems a risky conclusion, even so. I mean, very speculative is what I made.
But you have to speculate one way or the other, right? There's risks on both sides.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Yeah.
Salim, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you for a very interesting talk this evening, Dr. Walen. I'm an epidemiologist and a public health professor at the UB. And I wanted to put to you that maybe in considering this, the utilitarian need to actually at some point control this explosion in the human population, some atrocious solution, you might be considering that we're the only stakeholders or the only actors in this equation on this planet. But you probably are overlooking the reactions of Goddess Gaia. This planet seems to have a living clock that we do not understand yet. And we've seen it acting as the human population has been exponentially exploding over the last century. One of the interesting ways and the intervention of this living thing called the planet may actually be trying to put some brakes on this ongoing explosion of the population. One of the good examples that I can put to you is, for example, 50 years ago, we thought that epidemics and large infectious diseases were something of the past, that we had won them over. Several countries in the more advanced north had decided that maybe we should give up departments of public health, and that's not there's no need for them anymore. And then epidemics started returning, and today we are more and more convinced that we're going to be living in a more pestilential world, where epidemics might be culling hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of human beings. The COVID-19 may just be the first act in a long series of tragic returns of the infections, which may be one of the answers of the planet to this. The other interesting fact is that there is like an optimization or a magnification of the effects of climatic changes mostly in places where the population is very fertile. So if you can see that the problems of global warming that we're causing may be inconveniences in the UK or in France or in Canada, they become major tragedies in places like the Sahel. I'm watching famine in Eritrea and Somalia, and and these are the populations that are the most fertile on earth. Okay, we're having less than 2 babies in Lebanon. They're having much more than 7, amidst famine and drought and what have you. And we all say it's climatic change, but climatic change in Lebanon means that we need to maybe start climbing up the hills. They are the response in the Sahel is that literally dying, and so there's something playing up here. The biological clock of the planet is still very much active, and I don't think that we need to imagine that if we do not drop a bomb on ourselves, we will never get back to a point where we will have a manageable group of people that they can then imagine returning to some idyllic way of life. I think that we have to keep the biological parameters in mind. What's your opinion on that?
Thank you so much.
So, yes, thank you. So I'm afraid you misunderstood something fundamental about the argument. So the argument was not that the problem is human population explosion, right? The assumption I make, and that Will MacAskill makes, is that we, through part of our high technology future, if we go down the road we've been going down, is that we will do for the rest of the world what we have done in the more developed parts of the world, which is bring population growth under control, right? So there's no problem of a population explosion in Europe. It sounds like in Lebanon, in North America, right? The population explosion is still a problem in the poorer parts of the world. Well, we should be able to address that. So MacAskill assumes that the carrying capacity of the Earth is something like 10 billion. I suppose he's probably order of magnitude right? And that we could continue to go on like that for quite a long way, as long as our society is stable. So the solution, in scare quotes, the solution of the atrocious conclusion is not to address population explosion. The solution is to address the thought that our high-tech abilities come with high-tech destructive abilities as well, right? That we might, through the use of nuclear weapons, biological warfare, nanotechnology, and artificial intelligence, and who knows what else might yet be developed, turn those weapons on ourselves and do what Chris was afraid would happen with nuclear weapons now, right? So maybe not now, but maybe in 50 years, these technologies would indeed pose an existential risk for humanity. So the idea of the nuclear war is not to target humans, it's to target the technology. It's to wipe out our ability to wipe ourselves out, right? So that's the structure of the argument.
Yeah. If there aren't any more questions, I have maybe 1 or 2 comments.
Go, Bashar. Yes,
yeah.
please.
Yeah, if the argument is based on rejecting totalism and on accepting the neutrality of the value of future lives. Well, neutrality means they don't add anything having more. It doesn't, because once you introduce that as not neutral, it opens up the way, the home run for that atrocious conclusion, right? So there's no added value. Now, my first comment is that imagine now, it's fantasy as well. Imagine now that people on Earth are all adults and they all decide to end everything.
Right.
And therefore there will be no future lives.
Right.
And so it doesn't harm the project, but they don't have any project. They just want to end. So they want to go extinct. So they don't want to.
So sort of like the real community of the Shakers. Do you remember the
Yes,
Shakers?
yeah. You want to end it now, and that's it. And yeah,
Right.
so
No,
it's yeah,
no more
and
children.
and this would be only depriving future utilities. And wouldn't that be a loss, at least a bit of a loss? If not significant, some people might say it's a huge loss, even though it does not involve any violation of rights now, given that everybody is engaged in this
Right.
voluntarily. So it's a fantasy, of course, but I mean it shows. I mean, we more philosophers do this all the time. Wouldn't that be a source of worry for the kind of arguments you're presenting? That we think it is actually morally wrong for them to stop having, or you don't agree with that it is not morally wrong for them to stop?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think it is morally slightly problematic, but only slightly problematic, right? Why do I think it's problematic? Well, not because there's anyone who would be alive at that time who they would be wronging, but from our point of view, we as people who think of ourselves as having contributed to a culture that has some intrinsic value to it, right? We want that culture to continue. So there is some loss when you get to the end, right? And what you might say, well, what has gone wrong that these humans would voluntarily say, that's it, we don't want to continue. We think there's no point in continuing, we're going to stop with our generation. Then you'd want to say something's gone wrong. So there's something problematic in the scenario you depict. That seems undeniable. But, I'm framing this in terms of a sort of value that's deontologically significant, enough to justify taking resources away from people who already exist, causing harm to people who already exist, to prevent that, right? So let me turn the tables to you and say, how many people would you be willing to kill to prevent people in the future from making that sort of decision? I wouldn't be willing to kill too many.
Okay, so you think that, because of course there is the ontological one, but it doesn't eliminate. There's some kind of dent in the neutrality claim. If you partly that, I would think it is something bad for them to do that. I might not want to kill many people, but there is something bad in the decision. So you cannot have the neutrality completely neutral.
But here's how to think about it. What may be bad is not that they are cutting off the future. There's something bad in their very state of being that they would choose that, right? There's something unhealthy.
Yeah, they might be depressed, right? And this is unhealthy. They might need treatment, but that's not the only bad thing there about them. It's about preventing the future continuity, and that is also bad. If they're depressed and they start to like waste time and be less productive because of that, that will be bad, but not like ending life. There is a value to that kind of extinction in itself, even if it's not done at the cost of others. Living others. Yeah.
So I guess I'm willing to agree with that point, but I give it. So there are two things to say. One is, how much weight do you give that, as opposed to totalism, where in totalism, it's not just the end of the line; it's all that was missing,
Yeah.
all that could have been that matters, right? So I'm willing to grant you that the end of the line has a certain kind of badness intrinsic to it, without granting you the totalist point.
Yeah.
And then I want to complicate it by saying, look, the end is inevitable, right? If we are stuck on this planet, the end will come within about 1 billion years when the sun gets too hot. If we could expand into the galaxy, the way MacAskill fantasizes we could do, then the end will come in about 1 trillion years when the last stars burn out. But the end will come, right? And so then the question is, how much do you get by packing in all these extra generations in the middle? Does that matter? Or do you just say, the end is tragic? Yeah, okay, the end is tragic. I don't think you can get from that point to the totalist point.
So maybe there is something between neutrality and between symmetry. MacAskill assumes symmetry between the now and the future, non-existing yet. And there's a kind of a middle way where it's not neutral, but it's not symmetrical. You discount the future ones seriously, or you have some value of this value of extinction itself.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right.
Yes, but let me just, if I the other point, we have this problem more in rescue cases. I mean, the question now, you confront a case where you can rescue one person, but you have to sacrifice your new car.
Yeah.
Example, the car can be expensive.
A Bugatti, perhaps.
Yeah, Bugatti. Yeah, or and then you think to yourself, oh well, I can do better. I can let this guy die, can sell my Bugatti and save more people. Many people think this is unacceptable. Suppose not a Bugatti. It's like a good shape. Mercedes is in good shape. But I can still save more lives selling it and sending this to really people living in extreme poverty. So I shouldn't then do that. I should let the guy drown or die, and I can sell my car and use the money more effectively. Say, here we're not talking about future lives. We're talking about lives that exist. Still, we find it in a way, many find it unacceptable to do so. You can, in a way, rescue the present rather than kill or not save the present even. In this case, not killing in order to save that. I know you might say, no. In this case, you should not rescue those people. You should sell your car and save more lives. Go that way. But if you don't say that, and many people don't say that, wouldn't that be symmetrical to the kind of thinking we have about why we reject the atrocious conclusion? In the sense that we have to deal with the people now. It's not about the unborn yet or a non-existing having no weight. It's about rescue at the moment rather than in the future. Would that be relevant to this kind of other asymmetry we have, which is not related to totalism as such?
Right. No, that's a very helpful question. And I think the first thing I need to say is I haven't given that enough thought. So what I'm about to say may not be right. And I should give it more thought. But let's having put that qualification on the table, let's go ahead and say stupid things and be corrected. So I'm not sure what to make of the example you gave, because it seems to me that there are some confounding considerations that may come into play. So one kind of thought is, suppose for example, I am literally on my way to do some sort of a mission. I'm a doctor, right? And I'm needed in the field to handle a bunch of people who've just suffered. I'm in Ukraine, right? So the Russians have just bombed a village. There are a bunch of people who are really in serious need of medical treatment. I'm on my way to go provide the treatment. If I don't get there in the next day, they will die. Meanwhile, I see someone who's just been shot right next to me, but it's a pretty serious case. If I spend the time taking care of this person, I can save their life, but I'll miss the train. If I miss the train, I can't get there till the next day. All these other people will die. Is it really wrong for me to say, sorry, I got to catch that train? I think it's actually okay to say, sorry, I've got to catch that train, right? So one of the possible confounds here is, why didn't you sell your car to save the people already? Do we trust you to be willing to sell your car? What's going on in the case seems a little bit sort of funny. I think if I'm right about this case where there's a train, you got to make the train. If you don't make the train, you don't save the people. There are more people, and you're already committed. Then I'm not sure you're pushing me in a way that actually works. What do you say about my train case?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about the intuitions here. I mean, I don't have strong intuition that you should save the person. But I see your strategy. Your strategy is to say, well, in these cases, actually, we should go for the saving more lives rather than the one confronting us.
Mm-hmm.
Other than the other dubious reasons why you haven't sold your car, maybe like suddenly realized he should have sold his car, and now he can't say, oh, because I didn't think before about it, I shouldn't sell it now. Maybe that, but anyway, maybe Salim, you have a
the moral dilemma that has just been posed assumes that I'm sure that if I let that guy die by the side of the road, I will eventually make it to save the 10 other people who are awaiting me. But I say we live in a world of uncertainty. God's the world. And I have the opportunity of doing something here and now that presents to myself and something good about it. I have to do it because I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to do the good that I think I will do, and or that I may not be the only one who can do the good that will happen tomorrow. But at this point and this time, I am the only help for this person. So I personally think that the dilemma has to be approached with a sense of humility. I may not be there for tomorrow, and I'm probably not the only one who can do something for those that I cannot see. But at this point here, I'm it. How does it link back to the conversation where we were? I'm not very much sure. But I felt I needed to share my feeling about it.
Take Chris on the same point, right, Chris? On the same topic? Is your comment, Chris, you are muted. Oh, sorry, I've muted you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you were, okay, sorry, Chris, go ahead, yeah. Is it on the same point?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, similarly, why, in this case that Alec conveyed may be questionable in some ways. We may want to be sure that, we could complete the mission and so forth. But this just reminded me, or made me think about all of these arguments that depend on our relative certainty that the outcome will be as we projected it will be. And it seems reasonable to go by these various probabilities and so forth, but you just really can't be sure what's going to happen. And it just seems ridiculous to me. And not just from when I see you making your arguments based on probabilities, but also MacAskill's. It just seems ridiculous to have such, to draw conclusions from these probabilistic arguments when, I don't know, there are problems right before us that we can try to solve as best we can. We have, duties to help those people who are alive. Some, people who don't even exist yet, should we be thinking about what we ought to be committed for them? I mean, since they don't exist, as you said, they won't be less happy by not existing. I mean, it seems, I'm trying not to say that these arguments seem like ridiculous to me, because it seems to matter a lot what's going on with people who are alive right now, and to think about these possibilities in the future just seems, it just seems ridiculous, actually.
So can I say something to that?
Yeah.
So there are two things going on here, and I think it's important to pull them apart. One is epistemic doubts about the discussion, and one is moral doubts about the discussion, right? So we can have epistemic doubts because we think we have no idea what would actually affect people, let's say 100 years from now, right? We have trouble enough anticipating what's going to happen in 10 years, much less 100 years, right? And that argument is often made against the long-termists. One way I've heard it put was, imagine you were living 500 years ago in medieval Europe, and you were a devout Catholic, and you were worried about people living in the 21st century. What would you think would be the right thing to do? Well, presumably it would have to do with, strengthening the Catholic Church would be the right way to ensure the future benefit of humanity. And now we look back at them and we think, poor benighted fools. And, so we might be in the same sort of parochial blind spots ourselves, right? So that's certainly a reason to be cautious about making any sorts of decisions.
Okay.
People like MacAskill and Hilary Greaves and all the other folks involved in the long-termist movement try to take that sort of thing seriously and make arguments about why, look, there are some things we can say with reasonable confidence and other things we can't. And then they try to draw the line between the two of them. I don't know that they're successful. I'm dubious, but that's a whole other kind of argument.
Yeah.
My argument is focused on the moral principle, and that's why I'm willing to bandy around probabilities that are clearly, in some sense, pulled out of thin air, but they're not pulled out of thin air in a way that's completely disconnected from what we know about the world.
Well, let me just say this again. Because I suspect that the moral conviction about what to do depends on one's certainty or level of certainty about what will happen. Just in the case where, that's why you get on the train, because you're just assuming that you will save those people.
That's right.
But you may not, right? And so here's someone who's dying. So,
but think about normal triage, right? In a hospital situation, where you've got a bunch of people coming in, what do? Well, you don't know who's going to live and who's going to die, but you have some general knowledge of what kinds of cases you can address more effectively than others, and at what cost to resources and opportunity cost and so on. That's true. So you make your best probabilistic estimates and you work from that. So I'm assuming that we can do the same thing in the thought experiment with the train.
I guess when the considerations get to be more remote, something in me says, no, it doesn't seem right to make such assumptions. If we're talking about a hospital where there's lots of, I can make pretty confident judgments, when things are in my proximity, but, but when things when the variables increase, I feel like maybe I don't have the right to make such decisions.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, imagine the following scenario. You've got someone who is going to take a lot of resources, and he's in the room right now. And meanwhile, you've got word from the paramedics who've got a bunch of people who are coming in an ambulance. they're a half a mile away. If you start working on the guy who's there right now, you won't have the resources for the people who are coming in 5 minutes later, right? What do? I can imagine being really torn by that because you're not sure that people are going to make it that last half mile. But if your confidence is really high they're going to make it, then maybe you just do palliative care on the guy who's there right now, and you say, if we're wrong and the ambulance gets a flat tire, has an accident, then that was a tragedy, but it was the right thing to try to do.
Yeah. So the sense that it's right to do does depend on your confidence that the future will be as you project it to be.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, and there is, and of course there are situations where it's quite reasonable to do that. But I guess when we're talking about hundreds of years and billions of people, I'm just skeptical that those that it's correct or right actually to make those kinds of projections or to act on those kinds of projections.
Right. Yeah. I share your skepticism, but I'm also trying to be generous to the people who think that there are things that we can know. And look,
sure.
I do think we can know that there are certain risks in the future, and we should act on them.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think MacAskill's right to say is harm is harm whenever it occurs. If you were sure, imagine the following scenario. This is the kind of thing that drives these people, and I think they're right to be seriously concerned about this. Mm-hmm. Imagine you've got a bunch of nuclear waste, and there are two ways to dispose of it. One is going to, bury it so deep in the earth that it won't get into the groundwater ever, right? You're going to bury it in some mountain range, and it's, really, really safe.
In fact, that's what they do in Norway, by the way, I think.
Okay, good, right? So, but it's gonna take a lot of resources to provide that burial. The alternative is to bury it someplace really cheap, but then in 100 years, it's likely to leach out and get into the groundwater and cause all sorts of cancers to the people who live within 100 miles of it 100 years in the future. Well, none of those people are born yet, but still, don't we have an obligation to look out for their cancers, even if it means spending more money now, which might have had other good uses?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, and again, I think, well, where there's a high likelihood of causing harm to, near future even, I think, that does change the moral equation. So,
and they don't have to be, the point is they don't even have to be born yet. As long as we're really sure that there will be people who will suffer if we do this.
Right.
Yeah.
We can be reasonably sure, yeah.
Any more questions, comments? I guess not. Thank you, Alec, for this exciting talk, and thanks everybody for attending and for the exchange. And hopefully next time we will have you in Beirut. It's not distant future, I hope, and it's more likely than than the other scenarios we're considering. So
there you go. I hope so.
Probability is more than 1%. So.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, thank you all for having me, and thanks for the questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and looking forward to see you once more here.
Good. Same, Bashar. Okay.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, so get out of the